Let's bring in our panel for more. Monica Duffy. Toft is professor of international politics at the Fletcher School at Tufta University, and James Pethokoukis, economic policy analyst at the American Enterprise Institute, a CNBC contributor. I also wanted to mention, Monica, that you were in the United States Army as a Russian linguist, and you have some expertise in international security, ethnic and religious violence, civil wars. So you have particular expertise on this topic. When you're looking at where we stand today, ahead of this meeting between President Trump and President Zelenskyy, what do you think is the best possible outcome?
For today, so thank you for having me on. For today, I think the best possible outcome would be the declaration of a ceasefire, if we could get Putin to agree to that, and Zelenskyy and then the Europeans backing that. And then the next step would be freeze in place, right? I don't think it was, you had a nice conversation about the territory that's at risk here of exchange. And there's sort of 5 bits that are really important. You know, there's Ukraine writ large, which is not going to happen because, of course, Putin's been trying to get it for 3 years. There's Odessa, the southern part, which he's not going to get. He tried. Then there's that land bridge to Crimea, Zaporozhye and Kherson. There's Donbass. And then there's Crimea itself. And so at this point, for both Putin and Zelenskyy and their countries, Crimea is off the table. We don't know what's going to happen with that. And one of the bigger areas that's being debated is Donbass. So that's Donetsk and Luhansk. So at this point, I think if we can achieve a ceasefire and a freeze in place and recognition that these are the lines where they stand, but nobody at this point controls anything, I think that would be a pretty good outcome.
Did you hear anything from the meeting in Alaska between Putin and Trump that seemed to indicate there was any concern over a ceasefire?
You know, no, actually, because once Trump came out with the idea of potential security guarantees for Ukraine, that seemed to signal that there is a possibility of at least temporarily settling this. So at least the violence, the conflict, the movement of fronts, which you're right that, you know, very slowly and taking a lot of losses, Russia is still making advances. That is making to me, that signaled that there is a possibility of a ceasefire if it's the case that Putin is going to allow for outsiders, and this is where the Europeans are involved, and potentially the United States, to help have those security guarantees to keep the territory of Ukraine intact as it stands now. And then we can start talking about the possibility of land swaps, which are very difficult for both sides.
I mean, the interesting thing is you mentioned that Crimea seems to be off the table. We heard a lot of consternation about Crimea when Russia first invaded a decade ago, different administration in the White House. There was not the kind of to-do over that there was in this full invasion into Ukraine. But you look at business and Jim, what we have is you have aviation disrupted, shipping disrupted, oil disrupted, agriculture disrupted. Many businesses have stopped doing business, or at least they've declared that they would, in Russia because of this invasion. Does it reward the invader if you now give him back land? What do you think, Jim?
Well, I think you have sort of it's kind of the near term and the longer term. The near term, you had all this disruption, and you would assume that the disruption that would stop. That would be good for the Russian economy. In the short run, you would think, again, 2 countries not at war, also good for Ukraine's economy. Markets might like that, but I think about sort of the longer term. I don't know, and I don't think anybody knows what these security guarantees look like. But I do not think I would want to be long this market in 3 or 4 years when a rejuvenated Russian military tries to take the rest of Ukraine. That is my concern. So whatever sort of the near-term impact on the economy, on business, that is the longer-term impact I'm worried about, because what's really great for the global economy, peace, prosperity, and the expansion of global democracy, anything that looks like a Russia win goes counter to that.